Well, good evening, everybody. This is Brendan Baylod from the Great Lakes Shipwreck Research Group. I'd like to welcome everybody to a brand new season of Great Lakes Shipwrecks Live. This is a show where we interview people and personalities from the Great Lakes maritime history and diving communities who are doing interesting and innovative work in the preservation, interpretation, and discovery of lost ships on the Great Lakes. We have a few housekeeping things to do before we get into the program with our special guest tonight. Our guest is Racine, Wisconsin's premier maritime historian, Bob Jaeck. Welcome, Bob.
Thank you, Brendan. I'm glad to be here this evening.
Yeah, and Bob, thanks so much for helping us lead off this brand new season of Great Lakes Shipwrecks Live. Bob, for those of you who don't know, is my wreck hunting partner. And Bob and I have a long history together, which we'll explore for you all tonight. But Bob has done some fascinating work and has been around for a long time in the Great Lakes maritime history community. He is one of the co-authors of my book, Fathoms Deep But Not Forgotten, Wisconsin's Lost Ships. Bob wrote the history of Racine, Racine's maritime history for me, and he did a wonderful job. So a couple of things. I'd like to thank everybody who has joined the Great Lakes Shipwreck Research Group. 3,500, 3,200 members, something like that. Amazing. People don't realize that when we started it, we really just started it as a small group that was supposed to be for a couple of really hardcore research nerds, maybe 10 or 12 people. And people just started to begin asking to join. And I thought, well, okay, sure, why not? And pretty soon we had 300, 500, 1,000 people. And the next thing you knew, the group really filled. We just didn't know there was that much sort of pent up interest in Great Lakes shipwrecks. So thank you all for joining. I do occasionally, I want to let people know, remind people to keep their posts related to Great Lakes shipwrecks specifically. I have deleted a few posts from a few well-meaning folks who have announced other sort of non-Great Lakes things or not quite maritime history things. Sometimes I'll leave them up for a day or so, but just a reminder to folks to keep on topic. We try to do that because if you don't, the group kind of disintegrates. And that's happened. I've seen it happen to other groups. Okay, so a couple of other housekeeping things. This is an interview show. Feel free to ask questions. We can see your questions as they come up on the right side. So feel free to ask questions, and we'll try to take them. I am currently looking for additional guests for this season, although I do have quite a few lined up. Our next guest, I don't have a date yet, is going to be the legendary Lake Superior diver and wreck hunter Dan Fountain. From all the way up on in the Marquette, Ishpeming area. So a good friend who I've worked with for many years, spent a lot of time diving the Keweenaw with. So hopefully we can get Dan hooked in. All right. So Bob, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
We've certainly had a busy season together, haven't we?
We did. It was great. I enjoyed every moment of it.
Yeah, last year Bob and I went up and with the side scan, we surveyed the shipwrecks up in the Keweenaw Peninsula together. And then this season, we've had a couple of major expeditions out looking for the shipwrecks that shall not be named. None particularly successful, but a lot of fun nonetheless. So Bob, like I do with all the guests on the show, I usually kind of ask the same questions. How did you get involved in diving, and how did you get interested in this? It's an unusual thing for not a lot of people get interested in it. Tell us a little bit about your background.
Well, it's probably a little different than most people. I had started an apprenticeship with General Motors, and they threw me on third shift. So when the weekends came, I'd be up during the night. So I went and bought a book that I'd seen at a bookstore about Great Lakes shipwrecks. And as soon as I started reading it, I couldn't put it down. I went back the next day and bought some more books, I think 2 or 3. And as I was reading all this, I thought I might be able to go see some of this. So soon after that, I went to Irv's Dive Shop in Hales Corners and signed up for a diving class.
What year was that, Bob?
That would be 1977.
Oh my God, I was 10. So what was your first shipwreck that you ever got on, Bob?
Well, at the time I was young and I didn't have any money or anything, so we're shore diving. And I really hadn't established any friendships yet. Of course, there wasn't the internet and things like there is today. So I had heard about the Sebastopol off the south side of Milwaukee. So I'd go down the stairs that were there and met a couple people finally, and would suit up on shore and swim out to that wreck. It was about 300-400 feet from shore. And that's where I started diving.
Very cool. And a neat wreck too, for that matter. Underappreciated.
Correct. Nobody dives it now, but back in that time, there were a lot of divers. And you could go there on the weekend and the street was full, and there were always 3-4 divers heading out to it. And they would do dive classes there too. So it was a lot of fun.
And for those of you who don't know, the Sebastopol was just a beautiful sidewheel steamer that broke in half there in a huge storm in 1855, killing a number of people. And its massive sort of cargo of household goods, it was scattered all over around the wreck. I think, a lot of people have clay pipes and the like back in there.
Yes. Yeah. Well, one day I went down there to dive, and I'd probably been diving a few years at that point. So maybe this is around 1980. And I was working second shift then. And there was a large boat out there, a John boat, and some buoys near the wreck. And they looked at me, I looked at them, and I thought, well, okay, they don't seem to be excited about anything. And suited up, and away I went. And I had my face down. Back then, the visibility was maybe less than 2 feet. So I'd keep my nose to the bottom and just look at things on the way out. And next thing I know, it had gotten really dark. And what I didn't know was that they had a large net down there. And with a cut in the bottom running the length of it. It was about 200 feet long. And I had swam into this thing like a fish would. So now I'm inside this thing. And I just kind of looked at it and figured it out right away. And luckily, I was able to easily lift the bottom out and swim out of this thing, came up, and they were DNR, and they came over and they were apologizing to no end. They had wished they had said something. But that was one of the funniest things that happened to me out there on that particular site.
So, Bob, I know one of the things that you and I have done a lot is go out in your boat. And it's a great dive boat. And it's set up. It's got a big davit on it for lifting tanks out of the water. And now it's pretty well set up for side scanning. You started taking that boat up to Whitefish and diving the deeper wrecks up there. When did that start?
I started diving Whitefish in 95 with Bob Ducro and that group. But that boat I bought in, that was 95. That would be my first year taking it up there. That is when I bought it. I had to think for a minute. 1995.
That's right. And that's getting to be a little older now, but I see down there, I've got a picture of the wreck sniffer. I think that's the Mark II. I think I own the Mark I.
Yes. Well, that's actually mine. The one I put. Right.
Bob built my tow fish and built his own.
Yes. And that image in the far right corner, that's in the Root River.
That's right.
With the Lowrance unit.
So after a while, where did we first meet? I seem to recall that we were, it must have been, boy, Facebook didn't exist then. We met online somehow.
Yeah, I can explain that. I remember it very well.
Yeah.
You had your site on the internet, and I'd found that.
That's
and
right.
I'd been looking at it for a while, and Then I sent you an email one evening and started conversing with you, looking for the tug Wetzel and the Rudolph Wetzel that blew up in 1882 and sunk off Oak Creek. And we went back and forth on that for a couple of weeks. And at that point, I had kind of guessed that you lived somewhere in Michigan, was my guess. So one day I was curious and I asked, where do you live? And it turns out that you lived about 2 or 3 blocks from where I was working. That's in right. Oak Creek. And I had to work third shift that night. So on my way to work, I stopped in and met you for the first time then.
That's right. I remember that now. And I was really, really happy to meet somebody else who was interested in shipwrecks in my area. I had been, at that point, working pretty closely with David Swayze on the Great Lakes Shipwreck database. And I had been doing a lot of original research. I had my own database of Wisconsin shipwrecks. I'd been at it for maybe about 10 years then. And so I put up a web page. And that's how you found me. And I remember then, it wasn't long after that you invited me to a film festival at your house where you were showing their dive films. And Bob Ducro was there, and Mike Weinstein, two friends of ours who are no longer with us. And a lot of other people. Kim Stabelfelt was there. And I remember you and I said after that show in your living room, we said, we should really do something bigger. Remember?
Yes, absolutely. And geared towards research.
That's right. We were going to do something sort of to fund our wreck hunting expeditions and to do this research and find these shipwrecks. And so we formed this group of 4 of us who at the time, Brad Friend wasn't with us. It was Tim Reed. And the 4 of us, Tim actually designed that logo that's in the upper left-hand corner. Beautiful original logo he did for us. He did an excellent job. Yeah. And so we started to, meet at your house and at my house and at Kim's house. And eventually we decided to start this film festival. In addition, the film festival was secondary to the work of the foundation. We were going to do this online database of shipwrecks. We were going to do all this online, stuff. And, we started the Ghost Ships Festival then. And I know, I think you remember the first Ghost Ships Festival. If I remember correctly, you brought something to show. Yes. Highly collectible brochure from the first show. That's right. 2000. We held that at Centennial Hall at the Milwaukee Public Library. And I think we had 300 people. No, 150 people. It wasn't very big. I think it might have been a little more than that, but okay. It was a good turnout for our first year. Yeah, it was a rousing success. And like you, Bob, I've collected all those annual brochures. The show, like the foundation, sort of collapsed under its own weight, didn't it? I believe so. It was a great thing, but it became that we weren't doing the research, we were doing the show. And that's all we had time to do, was to organize that throughout the year. We did it basically as volunteers to ourselves, and it cut into our research work. Yeah, I lost interest in it because I wasn't interested in a scuba dive trade show. I was interested in the research aspect of it. And so I moved to Madison, and then I was no longer in the sort of physical space to do it. But right. Tim and you and Brad kept on with it for a number of years. And then Brad and John Albrecht kept doing it for a while. And then I think what eventually killed it was the hotel prices, right? Got too much and they couldn't do it anymore. The hotel became a big problem for those later board members. They were demanding more, and it I think became unsustainable. Yeah, so that's what happened to the Ghost Ships Festival. But there is, and I can, I suppose, speak off the record and say that it is very likely that there will be another Ghost Ships Festival soon in the spring in Wisconsin. That's all I'll say.
Something's in the works. That's good to hear. I'll be there.
Very cool. Here's
There's some of our
yeah, some of the people we got to know. That was one of the cool things, is that we got to know so many people. Hey, Bob.
it was outstanding. And sadly for me, a lot of those days that we had those shows, I had to work third shift. So I would have worked the night before and I came in and I was working the show and I was like a zombie.
Definitely. And there's our old friend Harry Zeich with you and me
Yep.
and Brad. And I think we see Dave Trotter there, and Ken Merriman and Dan Fountain.
Dan Fountain, Janet did now.
Yeah, those were the days. Sad to see it go, but I think it was kind of getting to be too much. And one of the things that I noticed when we were there, Bob, is, we were kind of the younger guys. And
yes,
there were less and less and less people every year. And I think it's because it's just not there aren't that many people diving anymore. There are some tech divers, but it seems like big events like this are maybe a thing of the past. So, Bob, can you tell me a little bit about your work with the state's program and over the years, the work you've done with the state?
Yes, that was an excellent program. When we started the Ghost Ships and the GLSRF group, I decided to help with the buoy project. I had the boat. So at one time I was doing the Appomattox, the Lumberman, and the Kate Kelly buoys. And the thought was then that I was just doing this temporarily, and some dive shops or other divers would come in and eventually pick up on this. And in time, some of that did happen, but I did those 3 buoys for a long time. And then when I started working, I had to switch jobs, and I was working in a power plant then. So it was a rotating shift, which made a lot of overtime. So it made me doing this at the level I was doing it very difficult. So I dropped off 2 of the buoys. So I was no longer doing the Lumberman or Kate Kelly. And then I continued on with the Appomattox until 2019. So I did it at some level for 19 years. It was a good experience, learned a lot, met a lot of nice people, and it was I was grateful to help out. But like everything else, it had to come to an end. And so if there's anybody out there that wants to do this, just contact Tammy in the state and see where it goes.
And Bob, didn't you do some of the underwater drawings on some of these wrecks with the state?
I helped out with the Lumberman, the Kate Kelly, and I believe Iris up at Washington Island, and maybe another 1 or 2 over the years.
How'd you get involved in that? How did you get involved to the point where you could actually go down there and draw a wreck? What type of training did that require? And how'd you get able to do that?
Yes, I joined a group called WUA, the Wisconsin Underwater Archeological Association, and they work very closely with the state. So between that group getting training and the state's training through the Historical Society, I acquired those skills. And then you could participate in some of the state projects, which was just organized very well. Always great people to work with. The Tammy and Caitlin with the state are just outstanding. And I would use some of my vacation time then to go on some of these things. And it was just very memorable. And I had a wonderful time. Plus, it's a good way to learn new things, new skills. So I was happy to be a part of that.
And if anybody else out there, is in Wisconsin and wants to become part of this or learn how to do this sort of underwater archaeological work, join the WUAA. Go to our site, WUAA.org, and you too can follow in Bob's footsteps. Bob, one of the things that you and I are really interested in and always have been interested in is finding shipwrecks. And you mentioned that back in the early day, my God, that's got to be 25 years ago now, you and I met over the Rudolph Wetzel. And as I understand it, you may have, now that you've got a big game hunting sonar, you've run some stuff over. Why don't you tell us a little about this ship and about your efforts to find her.
Okay. Well, I'm going to just take a little bit of a step back and say that I really enjoy doing the research, as we talked about earlier. And so a lot of my research that I was doing over the years was through the Racine library, and I'd go down and sit in there for hours at a time, and I would grab one microfilm roll. And the reason I'm saying this is it's a good way for people that are interested in this to maybe think about doing something like this. I would grab a roll, and I would start at the beginning, and anything nautical Great Lakes, I would copy a page of it and save it. And then I would make up these booklets. So anything in that roll, nautical, from beginning to end, I would have in a booklet. And I would make one nice looking booklet, and then one 3-page binder I called a working booklet that I could go through. By doing that, especially with a city like Racine, you could really dive into a lot of little incidental bits of information that are not in the bigger papers like in Buffalo or Chicago or Milwaukee. This medium-sized shipping town would put a lot in there about the captains, their families, running these vessels. It wasn't in there all the time, but when you cover a long area of dates like that, you pick up on this. Anyway, the Rudolph Wetzel then was in Racine. I forget what year it came in there. I think around 1874. And it exploded off Oak Creek in 1882, October of 1882. But the thing was, it was a hometown beloved vessel. The people of that town just adored the captain on there. He was involved with the town. He was always tinkering with things. One example is about 2 years before this tugboat blew up, him and another man in town constructed an inflatable boat that they were rowing around Racine, unbelievably, back in the late 1870s, early 1880s. And so when this vessel blew up, it really hurt that town a lot, to the point that it was mentioned in the papers on the date of the explosion for almost 40 years after that happened. And wow. They looked and looked for it, and it's never been found. But I started researching this vessel in 1982 is when I started putting information together on it. And I thought in time I could get enough to find it. But it turns out the location of its sinking was sort of all over the place, maybe within a 3 square mile area. And this was a small vessel, 56 feet, 23 tons. And they were in a race for a tow. This tugboat Wetzel and the tug Sill were north of Racine off a place called Wind Point. And they saw a vessel coming out of Milwaukee, a sailing vessel. So they took off racing north, and they wanted this tow. And I think what happened was the Wetzel had run its boiler low on water, and that boiler got superheated. It did have a safety valve on there, but at the point it didn't matter. They saw the engineer come out because the Sill, the second tugboat, was behind the Wetzel. They saw the engineer come out and say something to the captain, who was Frank Lovell of the Wetzel. The engineer went back and, reaching through a window, had his hand formed to like grab a valve, and then they saw him turn his forearm and turn a valve. And moments later, the boiler exploded violently. Excuse me, literally tearing this ship apart. It was never seen again after that. And then throughout the next week, large pieces of the hull were floating up. So the wreck site, I don't really expect to find a lot. The engine, maybe some of the stern, the propeller, and the boiler maybe, but that's going to be pretty wrecked. The explosion on this tug was exceptionally violent. And so the engineer must have put a lot of cold water in there. And when that cold water hits hot, red hot metal, it does a steam explosion, and steam explosions are very violent. The water instantly expands 1,600 times.
Wow.
Then that would have blown that boiler, and then any other water left in there that was real hot would have released its energy at the same moment, and that would have added to it. So a lot of the tug explosions I read about weren't quite as violent as this one. So
Bob,
it's a sad story.
It's a really important part of Racine's history. I can understand why you've been looking for it for so long. Now that you've got the wreck sniffer, yes, and you went out there, tell us what you found.
Well, I was out there in September and doing multiple runs with my larger boat because it had gotten a little rougher out. In the summer, I was out there with the inflatable boat. I can control the speed better. With my larger boat, as you know, it's an old 2-cycle motor. I can't quite throttle it down, but as slow as I'd like to go. But at any rate, I can still do useful work with it. And I did find a site where this could be something possible. It's not 56 feet long, but it may be that not much of that vessel is left enough to make it 60 feet long. Also in this image, on the front of that tugboat is Captain Frank Lovell standing there. You can see him. And then behind him is the schooner Jaeck, a very large, famous schooner out of Racine. And on the railing is a captain of the Jaeck, Larry Essen, sitting there, and a very famous Great Lakes captain. So this image is really a good one, and portrays the Wetzel in a very gallant way.
It is a good picture. I'll be honest with you, it's not one that I've seen very often, not widely circulated. Very cool. So Bob,
yes,
yeah, of course, there are a number of other wrecks that haven't been found off Racine, and you and I are both interested in them. I know the Lens Ellsworth is a really interesting one. She's a really beautiful ship. And I know you and I have researched this extensively, and this is another one that we're after. Why don't you talk about it a little?
Yes, this one I believe is out there yet. It has not been found. It's odd in that apparently there was a witness to its sinking, and he was a young boy. I don't know his age, but I'm going to guess around 10 years old. And he was up on the bluff where his house was in Racine, and the family just had dinner, and everybody was starting to relax after the dinner. And this Simone Dutton went out on the front porch with a telescope for mariners, and he was looking out on the lake, and he was looking up towards Wind Point, and he saw a bark out there sailing, and it was a gale on the lake. So he was watching the boat ride and get pushed around by the waves. And he looked then a little bit south, and he noticed this vessel. He didn't know until later, but it was the Lens Ellsworth. So he was watching that vessel, and as he was watching through this telescope, he noticed that the bow started riding lower and lower and lower and lower until it just started sinking by the bow, and he watched it go down. And it somewhat traumatized him. He walked into the house and told his family, and for some reason his father said, "Don't say anything to anybody." And so no help was ever sent out to offer any rescue to these people. And it sank in May of 1884. So the water would have been pretty cold yet. He struggled with this throughout his life. As time went on, friends told him he should say something. Finally, he went to the Racine Historical Society, or a Racine Museum, and talked with this fellow named Eugene Leach. They found out that the vessel that sank then was indeed the Lens Ellsworth on that date. A lot of people think it sunk off at Evanston or possibly Kenosha. Anyway, he eventually went to the police and wrote a deposition that he had witnessed it when he was a young boy. This was like 30 some years later. So it's probably out there, and it was carrying stone.
Yeah.
So I would imagine when this thing sank and filled, it hit the bottom, probably bow first, pretty hard. And I'm sure it's fillet of schooner all over down there.
Yeah, it's an interesting wreck with an interesting story. I've seen that account myself, and you read it, and it just boggles the mind. And what a thing for that young man to have to carry around with him, having seen it. But the legend I have heard about him from read,
yes, it haunted him the rest of his life.
Yeah, I've read that it was coming from Lake Superior, and that it was carrying red sandstone from the Jacobsville quarries up on the Keweenaw Peninsula, which is part of why I'm interested in it. A lot of Jacobsville redstone was used down in Chicago to build many of the municipal buildings. And I believe this is about the right time for that, 1894, for it to have been carrying that Jacobsville sandstone. So another one that we definitely could find, Bob. But like you say, you got to have the good seeing conditions, because it's probably not got its mast standing, so to speak. So there are a couple others that
it's going to be obliterated.
Yeah, one of the ones that I wrote up is the Lost Ship of the Month last year. It's probably one of the top wreck hunting targets on Lake Michigan, mostly just because she's in a place where there are a lot of people. And so a lot of people claim to have searched for her. And you often hear that all the bottom off of Wind Point has been covered by wreck hunters, but we both know that's not true. And a lot of times it was covered by wreck hunters with older equipment, or sometimes they just had fish finders. They weren't really side scanning. So this is probably out there too. Why don't you tell us about it, Bob?
Yes, this is Thomas H. Smith. He was an industrialist out of Sturgeon Bay. They were in the quarry business. And this was one of their tugs or steam barges. This vessel did whatever they needed to do. It had left Chicago and was heading north. And after it left Chicago, a very heavy fog had moved in. And somewhere off of Racine, they believe, they hit the steamer Arthur Orr, which had left Milwaukee in this very thick fog. What's interesting is that both vessels were going near full speed in this fog. And they probably should not have been. And back then, too, a lot of times they wouldn't note in their logbooks that they would say haze, because in haze you could go whatever speed you wanted, but in fog you had to check your speed down. An interesting thing there that those old timers did. At any rate, the Arthur Orr hit the steam barge Smith, and everybody was able to get onto the Arthur Orr. Nobody died, and within time the Smith sank, and the accounts run anywhere between 90 to 150 feet. It most likely could be even deeper. And since then, people have been looking for this thing. And it's unbelievable that it hasn't been found, because years back, I used to even run into old timers going out of Racine with side scans or their fish finders. And people have put a lot of time looking for this vessel. The thing is, I don't think anybody has done it symptomatically. So they've gone here, have gone there. It's in literature, it's said it was off Wind Point, which is 3 miles north of Racine. Like you said, that area has been heavily sonar scanned. This is one that if you would look at the paperwork of its sinking, it would look like it would be fairly easy to find, but it has not been found, and it should still be out there, I believe.
So, Bob, one of the things that I noticed about it, I've actually got the wreck report, which I'm sure you've seen too, from the National Archives.
Yes.
Customs House wreck report. And the captain on there, he says exactly where it went down. Of course, you have to wonder. The fog was heavy. He couldn't see shore. How the heck did he know where he was? And so that's where the real conjecture lies, is, the captain's report, probably isn't so accurate. But, there's other than that. There's the wreckage that, was seen. And there are a number of other pieces of data, let's just say, that perhaps you and I might use to construct a search grid at some point.
Yes, I think we will have to sit down some evening and do this. And a lot of other people have done that. I actually have some other people's data of one person would be Bob Ducro. I was able to get his research after he passed away, and he has a lot of notes on this vessel. He had a lot of interest in this vessel, as did a lot of the old timers. And it should not be, like I say, you look at it, it should not be too hard to find. So, but what I always find interesting is these old time captains kind of knew where they were. Go ahead.
Well, she really was nothing but a hull built around a giant engine and boiler, and there still should be a really, really big piece of engine down there.
Absolutely, absolutely, and these captains, like I say, they did know where they were. They had the propeller counters on their vessels. They were pretty good at using the compass, and even after the Arthur Orr hit the Smith, it was able to navigate just fine to, I believe, Chicago. So it should be somewhere off Wind Point.
We should go and find that one this spring. We'll get out there, and find it. Hard to say, though. Hard to say.
Yes.
Well, let's move on to one that's near and dear to my heart that I've been looking for years with you. And we've actually spent some time out there side scanning. It's the Barkentine Northwest. And I think I'm a bit more of the expert on this, I suppose, but I'll ask you to talk about it. The one thing that I do have is I think that I'm pretty confident that I have a photo of her. I bought this stereopticon slide. For those of you who know me, you know I collect antiquarian stereopticon slides from the 1860s, 70s, and 80s of Great Lakes vessels. And this is a view taken at Chicago in around 1870. And it shows a bunch of just nameless vessels. But I zoomed in on this with an eye loop, and I spotted this name board here on this schooner, and it says Northwest. There was only one big schooner like this called the Northwest, and that's the one that we're searching for. And so I think I've actually been able to find an unlikely photo. And very rare to find photos of schooners from the 1870s. People didn't take pictures of them. They were like boxcars of the day. But this one was a beautiful ship. She had a really ornate transom, which you can't quite see here because I've cut it off, but a beautiful white hull, and she lies on the bottom out there. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about it, Bob?
Well, we've been looking for it, and you and I have been discussing some of the research information we have, trying to interpret it different ways. It was carrying a full load of wheat. So I would imagine soon after it settled on the bottom that wheat expanded and opened this thing up. So we're definitely not looking for an intact hull, I would say. It's going to be down there and probably pretty broken up. You know what's amazing with these wrecks off Racine is a heavy charter fishing town, and to this day, dozens of these charter fishermen go out, and you would think that they would have gotten snagged on some of the stuff, and any one of these three vessels, and have reported something, but that hasn't happened yet.
Yeah, you bring up a good point, Bob. I do think this is fillet of schooner as well. Otherwise, I think she'd have been found already. This ship shouldn't be too far from the Racine, I think, by my calculation. And, the problem is that there's probably just a centerboard trunk standing, if that. But again, these wrecks are hard to find because they're opened up. A lot of times these wrecks that were in, shallower water, for example, the Northwest mastheads or top masts were breaking the surface after she settled. So she's that shallow. They don't survive well. But we have painted the bottom out there. And one of the things that I know you'll agree with, Bob, we were out there, and the visibility wasn't, the seeing with the side scan wasn't very good due to thermoclines, and
Right.
it would be easy to lose this out at the end in the thermocline. We really probably could have overlapped maybe a little closer, especially looking for maybe a fragmentary wreck. So we'll go at it again though. She was a good sized ship, almost 170 feet.
Yes, we'll definitely be out there next summer, and we'll be continuing our game plan.
Yep. So I know, Bob, one of the things that you've really spent a lot of time doing is diving around on Racine Reef. And Racine Reef, for those of you who don't know, is just a massive piece of rock right off Racine, Wisconsin. It's the only thing like it in the whole southern, 2/3 of Lake Michigan. And it is just treacherous. And Bob is the leading expert out there on Racine Reef and on its history and on all of the amazing things that are out there. It was the site of many, many wrecks and many ships that were recovered but left good chunks of their remains on there. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your work on Racine Reef, Bob?
Okay. Yes, Brendan. I have in my files almost 70 vessels that have hit the reef, and it appears that 9 of them were total losses in some capacity. So, and amazingly, out of those near 70 vessels that hit that, there was no loss of life, except for in 1906, that image there of that reef lighthouse. One of the lighthouse keepers drowned out there in September of 1918. And that was the only loss of life, was somebody trying to protect vessels from hitting the reef.
Yeah, it is interesting. They had that big lighthouse out there, and that's gone now. Now all they've got is that sort of caisson with the light on it. It seems like it's collapsing, falling over.
Yes, it's a crib. Just a crib with a 50, well, almost 60-foot light on it now. Why don't you go to the next image, Brendan?
So these are the maps showing the reef, which is really pretty giant.
Oh, yep. There, okay. There are the maps. And if you look at the map to the left, and it might be a little hard to see, I know, but you can see where there's more buildings on land. That's the city of Racine. If you look to the right of the city, you see kind of a little blob structure on the map. That's the Racine Reef. And back in the day, a lot of the vessels would coast. They would follow the coast up. So you could see of why so many had hit that reef, glancing off of it. And some of these were sailing vessels. About half the vessels that hit it were sailing vessels. The other half was steamers. It's almost 50-50. They would have to go past Racine, and then they would get up to Wind Point. So you see that piece of land sticking out. And then they would make a little bit of a turn left, some of them towards Milwaukee. But that reef is almost 2 miles long and about 3/4 of a mile wide. And the shape of it is kind of not really how we see on that map. That map is made just to show the kind of the outline of the reef. There's really a lot more like channels and different shapes and things, just fascinating structure underwater. And the reef comes, when the water is at an average level, the reef comes within about 4 feet of the surface. So you can actually go out there and be almost 2 miles from shore and be standing on the rocks of this reef. It's just amazing. And the vessels hitting it, it continues to this day. Power boats and sailboats still strike this thing and damage themselves out there. So one of the most famous wrecks was the Merchant. And the Merchant, yeah, there it is. The Merchant was on the American side, the first iron hull vessel for commercial service. The upper works was wood, and it was built in 1861. And it was a rather large vessel, and it ran for 13 years on the same shipping route from Buffalo, New York to Chicago. And it was always profitable. And I can't believe no one's written a book about it, so I plan to. And the amount of literature in the papers on this vessel, on how profitable it was, and comparing it with steel, iron, and wood ships, it's just an immense history here. So this vessel ran aground on the Reef in October of 1875. I started looking for it also and researching it around 1982. But I wasn't really doing much with it except researching until 1995. And then in 1995, I really stepped it up, and I thought, I'm going to find the remains of this thing, and I'm going to make a big effort at it. Well, excuse me, reading the newspaper accounts, it was salvaged on the Reef. It took them roughly 5 years. And they were salvaging it with dynamite. And they would blow that hull up sections at a time with dynamite. And they would send divers down, sometimes up to 8 divers at a time with hooks to get the pieces of the iron up. And so this thing was visible off Racine for years. And I know somebody did take a photo of it with a telephoto lens from land, but I've never found that image. Maybe it doesn't exist anymore, but when I'm in the local antique shops, I'm always looking for it. At any rate, I was almost ready to give up, and this is where research comes in. I found an article from Martin Knudsen, a very famous lighthouse keeper, and he was stationed in Racine at the time, and it was a very calm, clear day on one of the summer days in 1900, and he rowed out to the Reef in a rowboat, and he was looking around out there, and he said he could see one of the propeller blades and parts of the Merchant. And he was explicit about what he was seeing and that it came from the Merchant. Well, that really gave me some new life into getting out there and seeing if I could find this thing. Because now I knew what to look for. He said that there were some parts of the hull left, some boxes, like I said, one of the buckets to the propeller blade and other items. So then I started working at it more. And again, Brad Friend and I were doing this, and we were starting to get discouraged. This is such a large reef. So one day we decided to throw Brad in the water, and we put him off the back of my boat with a rope, and I started pulling him. And on the first pass, he found that propeller blade that Martin Knudsen had seen. And then from then on, I just spent years expanding that search area. Later, doing research, I found out there was another group that had found this boat in the 1980s, and this fellow was named Dave Chitka, and he was running charters out there, and they had run an article in the paper about him, and they showed pieces of the Merchant that he was holding up in the water. I decided to try and see if I could find Dave. So I went to the phone book at that time, and I looked up, and all I saw was his wife in there. So I called her, learned they had divorced, but she was offered to be real helpful. I went and met her. She gave me Dave's contact information. He lives in Florida. Excuse me. And contacted Dave. Okay, now on the image you showed here, I'll get back to Dave in a moment. But in that image that you have there to the left, the Merchant artifacts, you can see parts of the iron hull, the first iron hull steamer on the Great Lakes. On the left of those pictures, you can see parts of this hull. On the bottom, going the second one from the left, you can see one of the hooks that was described the divers used. There it is. You can see the handle end of it. And that's still down there. The next image is of a bollard. Then we go all the way to the right. In the top photo, I think that that's a ring that the propeller shaft went through. Then coming down one more is one of the propeller blades. And then on the lower left photo, I'm going to talk about that now. I'm going to get back to Dave. and that'll connect with this picture. So I got Dave on the phone. He was very nice, very helpful, gave me some Loran numbers. And then he said, did you find the other wreck on the reef? And I said, no. And he said, well, there's another wreck on that reef. We call it the railroad wreck because it's loaded with train rails. And I said, well, how do I find that? And he says, well, he says, do you know where this particular structure is on the reef? And he described it, and I immediately knew what he was talking about. And I said, yes, I know where that is and what it is. And he says, okay, go all the way to the one end of that. He says, at that end, you will find railroad parts. He says, from there, swim north, and then you will find a shape of a bowl in the bottom. He says, go up to the lip of the bowl, swim into the bowl, and that shipwreck will be there. So I went out there after work one night with my son as boat tender, went to the end of the structure. Sure enough, there was railroad parts. Okay. Started swimming north then, swimming, I don't know, 300-400 feet north. All of a sudden, I see this shape in the bottom, and it does look like a little bit of a lip of a bowl. I swim up over that, and now I swim maybe another 100 feet, and here's that shipwreck. And there's actually parts of it was a barge, and there's actually parts of the merchant in there. So I think it was one of the salvage barges. And at that time, Racine's railroad company had barges of their own. I'm not sure why, but there's like a small gauge railroad track in there and pieces of the merchant. I wish I would have took more photos back then. These are all film photos, and you can see the quagga mussels are coming in. This is before, or zebra mussels. This is pre-quagga, but they were just starting. And now if you go out there, you almost wouldn't recognize any of this. It's almost completely buried in inches of quagga mussels now. So another diver coming behind me looking for this stuff is going to have a very tough time of it, because when I go back to these sites, or have gone, I even have trouble identifying it. It's almost being consumed by the reef.
Boy, that's amazing that you were able to find that stuff and record where it is, because if you hadn't done that, nobody would ever be able to find that now.
Right, it's gone pretty much.
Just buried. So one of the things that I know you helped me with quite a lot, Bob, was this stereopticon. As people know, I collect these things, and I found a stereopticon for sale. Charles Pond, the Buffalo, New York photographer, shot a series of vessels in ice off Buffalo in May of 1870. And one of them was this image here. And I spotted this on the eBay, and I snapped it up promptly. And there are actually two different these images. I sold one to Pat Labadie, and the other I have. And we both were pretty sure that it was the merchant. It was never photographed otherwise. And so, Bob, you were able to positively identify it for us from the lithograph on the other side. The way we could tell is it's being towed by this big wooden vessel with a big hogging arch. The vessel that it's towing behind it is even longer, from 1870, and doesn't have a hogging arch. A wooden vessel of that size would have needed one, except that vessel probably isn't wooden. Which is, I believe, Bob, how
Correct.
you were able to make the identification that that's the merchant.
Yes, Pat Labadie was instrumental in that too. And we knew you were collecting photos, so we had you kind of keeping an eye out for the merchant. And this one certainly caught your eye. You did an excellent job of knowing what it was quick on, and I'm glad you've got it, because these images you have are the only existing images we know of the merchant.
Yeah, it's amazing. You know, that some of these images still do pop up for sale every once in a while. And, I try to snag them if I can. They're getting expensive, though. It's not an inexpensive thing to collect, unfortunately. So in any event, I know, Bob, there are a lot of other things on the reef over the years that you've spotted out there, including I think this is the keel shoe of the Neptune that it left out there, correct?
I believe it is the Neptune. The only reason I say it's the Neptune is because I know the Neptune lost its rudder shoe for sure. Other vessels, they had damaged rudder shoes. But this is another thing that Martin Knudsen that day said he saw out there. So here's something described by a lighthouse keeper from 1900, and I found that. And
Wow.
I believe it's from the Neptune. So that's amazing. Again, where the research pays off, spending time in those microfilm rolls for our local wreck really help. This is a rudder that Brad Friend found out on the reef. That could be from any number of schooners that were lost out there. So that thing is 14 foot tall. We were able to make a nice drawing from it, and it just sits out there now. So used to be before the quagga mussels. Go ahead.
I said, I suppose it's buried under quaggas now.
Yes, you would not even find this now. Used to be every dive I used to do before the zebra mussels and quagga mussels, I would find something from a shipwreck. Literally every dive I found something new. Now it's all covered.
Wow. Yeah, I know. I think the days of being able to just swim around and find stuff out there are over. Although you did show me a beautiful crinoid stem that one time, a big fossil that you had found out there.
Yes. It's a nice little artifact to have. Hey, there's the search team.
Yeah, that's you and me out on Porter's Island outside of Copper Harbor. We took my boat up there. We were side scanning the Saga is the wreck off of the Harbor House restaurant there. Looks like an underwater garbage dump, eh?
It does. It's a large vessel, that's for sure.
So
there's always more to find.
Definitely. We're coming up on the end of our time, and I invite people to ask any questions that they might have. I have one editorial piece, and that is that our next guest, Dan Fountain, is indeed from Negaunee, Michigan, which is neither Marquette nor Ishpeming, but in the area. So if anybody wants to ask Bob any questions, I think we have Wes Olszewski on here, hoping that you found the Wetzel. He wrote a story about her in his book, Wooden Ships and Deadly Seas, which I think you may have a copy of.
I have that right here.
Ah, very cool.
And I was so surprised to find this book and see that he's had a story of the Wetzel in there. And I contacted him and I said, what drew your interest to this? And he knew about the accident. It was kind of an unknown shipwreck and event. So he wrote an excellent story, and I was happy to see it in there and read it. So thank you, Wes.
Very cool. Not seeing a lot of questions, but a lot of nice comments. People appreciating all the work you've done over the years, Bob, particularly out there on Racine Reef. So we're running up on the end of our time here. Bob, I'd like to really thank you for coming on and agreeing to kick us off with this season's program. So thank you so much for doing that. And little bit of housekeeping again. If you know of anybody who's doing really innovative work in Great Lakes shipwreck preservation, interpretation, or research or discovery, let me know. I'm always looking for new guests on the show. This particular program can be viewed live on our group, but I also upload these to YouTube, so for posterity. So this will be up on our YouTube channel, the Great Lakes Shipwreck Research Group, and I'll link to it on YouTube from the channel. So Bob, you will now live in for posterity there on YouTube.
Say, Brendan, I would like to say thank you to Greg Kent for allowing me to be at his home this evening using his computer. My laptop didn't have quite enough horsepower for this, and he put that PowerPoint together and all those images. He did an outstanding job. So thank you, Greg.
Yeah, thanks, Greg, for all of this, for allowing Bob to be there and for putting that together. So, and thank you again, Bob. I think we are just about out of time. Please join us again for our next program, which I will post soon, where we will enjoy hearing the many exploits and daring discoveries of Dan Fountain. So thank you, everybody. And thank you, Bob. Have a good evening, everybody. Good night.
Thank you.